Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I just read The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie and it's absolutely amazing. The premise is somewhat hard to define though, as this book does something very weird. Normally in a fantasy adventure, the gang gets together within the first few chapters or so, after which they go on an adventure together. This series, however, takes the entirety of the first book just for the setup, and somehow it works. It is basically 500 pages of character and world introduction, and somehow it is more entertaining than the majority of books I've read. The main reason why this is that Abercrombie has crafted a set of characters with an extreme amount of depth. Every character has their surprises and nuance that the book slowly introduces you to. And while every character has their flaws, which admittedly tend to be pretty big, they also have their strengths, and it's very much the collection of interesting grey characters that makes this book so interesting. So who are they? Well, foremost there is Inquisitor Glokta, a former legend who was slowly torn apart in the enemy's torture chambers. After escaping, this shell of a man has now become an Inquisitor. Then there's Logan Ninefingers, seemingly an okay warrior with a pretty mild personality. Yet somehow he also has the reputation of being the most horrible creature in the Northern Realm. Jezzel is a spoiled brat who underneath does have a decent amount of talent and a bit of a fighting spirit. Those are definitely the three most important ones, but there's also Beaz, a mysterious wizard with an unknown goal and an altogether unwizardly personality. Pharaoh, a former slave who has vowed to take revenge against her captors, but who will need to learn to trust again if she wants to succeed. And Longfoot, a cheery navigator with a bigger ego than the rest of the cast combined. I mean, there are way more, but these are definitely the main ones. Oddly enough, one of the things this book reminded me of was You by Caroline Kepnes. No matter if you've seen the show or read the book, both have a very intimate relationship with the main characters, during which you constantly get to look inside of their skull. You don't just see their dialogue, but also their thought process behind it. You get to read all the observations and intrusive thoughts that the characters have, but would never voice out loud. This creates a much tighter bond with these characters as you understand their motivations a lot better. On top of that, it's also just flat out hilarious, especially with Inquisitor Glokta, who is by far the most resentful, jaded asshole you'll ever meet. This is not to say that the dialogue itself was lackluster though. In fact, I found it to be excellent, and a good way to view this book is, what if Quentin Tarantino wrote a book? The dialogue is witty, informative and perfectly adapted to each character. For the Warhammer fans, it is like an upgraded version of the Night Lords trilogy but then set in medieval times. Talking about the setting, it is medieval with a bit of fantasy. I say a bit because the magic and fairy tales are a lot more on the background than in most other fantasy books. Sure, there are wizards, legends and such, but they only occur a handful of times in the book, and as a result of that they feel a lot more special. But definitely don't expect some big anime magic battles or some big elven fantasy settings. Another thing which I really liked is the portrayal of Glokta. I understand that this might be a bit of a personal thing, but I've gone through and still have plenty of illness and injury myself. And I've gotten absolutely sick of these TV tropes where sickness is romanticized, or those handicapped characters who got better because they quote-unquote overcame their illness. Regardless, that is where Glokta as a character comes in. Unlike so many of these garbage TV shows, this book takes a much more realistic and grim look at the topic. Glokta didn't get superpowers when they tore apart his limbs, no, he simply can't use them anymore. And he didn't magically become likable because he wakes up in pain every day. This book instead shows the constant confrontation with things he can no longer do, the resentment at friends who abandoned him, and the sadistic pleasure he gets when someone else has to walk in his shoes for a while. Sure, Glokta is a bit far on the other side of the spectrum, but I do love this book for giving some actual representation of what it can be like to be sick, rather than some perverted fantasy meant to make healthy people feel better about themselves, or some ridiculous poorly informed gibberish just meant to increase shock factor. Then finally I want to say that the ending is an absolute blast, but yeah, as always I can't say what it is for spoiler reasons, but you'll have to trust me when I say it is wild. So in conclusion, The Blade itself is an amazing fantasy book that you have to read. Especially if you've only read Warhammer before, I can guarantee you that you'll like this book too, because it's also really grimdark. Conversely, if you're viewing this as a fan of this book, may I recommend the Night Lords trilogy by Aaron Dembski-Bowden. It's maybe not as deep as this one, but it has a lot of similar vibes to it. Anyways, that's what I got for you today. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing and click ringing the bell to appease the Great Horned Rat. For more lore content, please check my main channel and leave any book recommendations in the comments down below. I gotta get back to reading the next book.